I had always been a creature of habit. My life followed a predictable pattern. I woke up in the morning, prepared breakfast, kissed my partner goodbye, and carried on with the monotony of my day. My partner, who had once been my world, had become little more than a shadow in my routine. We had grown apart over the years, our conversations reduced to dull exchanges, our once passionate love replaced by polite indifference. I knew this wasn't what I had signed up for, but what was the alternative? I had tried countless times to reignite the spark, but the harder I tried, the more distant we became. Our physical intimacy had dwindled to the point where I couldn't remember the last time we had been close. I had told myself that maybe it was just a phase, that things would get better, but deep down I knew it wasn't. It was during one of those quiet, lonely nights that I first noticed him again, the guy at the coffee shop. He was just a stranger, someone I would pass by every day, but something about him drew me in. His smile, his laughter, the way he carried himself, it was different. He wasn't like the others I had encountered. There was something raw about him. I started taking the long way to the coffee shop, hoping to run into him, hoping for a brief exchange of words. Eventually, it became our routine. I'd order my coffee. He'd greet me with that same warm smile, and we'd chat about the mundane things in life. It wasn't much, but to me, it felt like a lifeline. I didn't even realize how badly I needed that attention until it was already too late. Every conversation with him seemed to fill the hollow space inside me. He made me feel seen, heard, important in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. There was no judgment in his eyes, no expectation. It was just two people sharing a moment. My partner was never home when I needed them, always working late or caught up in their own world. But with this stranger, I was alive again. I started looking forward to those small, fleeting moments with him. It wasn't long before we started meeting outside the coffee shop. A lunch here, a dinner there. Each meeting felt like a fresh breath of air. The connection between us deepened, though I refused to acknowledge what it was. It was just friendship, I told myself. But in the back of my mind, I knew that wasn't true. There was an undeniable pull between us, something magnetic, something dangerous. I told myself over and over that it wasn't cheating. It wasn't like we were having an affair. We hadn't crossed that line yet. But even as I rationalized it, I could feel myself getting closer to it. I wanted more from him, and I hated myself for it. I had a partner at home, someone who deserved my loyalty, but here I was, secretly longing for the attention and affection that had been absent for so long. I knew I was walking a fine line. I knew it was wrong, that I should be content with what I had, but the truth was I wasn't. The spark had gone out, and this stranger, with his effortless charm and warmth, was slowly filling the emptiness I had been trying to ignore. It wasn't until one night, when the air between us became charged with something more than words, that I realized what was happening. We were sitting together in a small, dimly lit restaurant. He reached across the table, his fingers grazing mine in a moment of unspoken connection. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The desire, the need for more, was unmistakable. But I hesitated. What was I doing? I had a life, a commitment. But in that instant, all of that seemed so far away, so irrelevant. His gaze never left mine, his eyes filled with an intensity one couldn't ignore. I knew what was about to happen. I could feel it, the air thick with anticipation. I wanted it. I wanted him. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. The guilt, the shame, they were there, lurking in the back of my mind, but they didn't have the power to stop me. I leaned forward, closing the distance between us, and our lips met in a kiss that burned with a need I hadn't felt in years. The floodgates opened, and all of the emotions I had buried for so long came rushing to the surface. The kiss was the beginning, the catalyst for everything that followed. In that brief moment, I realized how far I had fallen, how easily I had allowed myself to slip away from everything I had once held dear. But it didn't matter. I wanted this. I wanted him. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. We talked less, touched more. The world outside of that restaurant ceased to exist. It was just the two of us, entwined in a moment that felt like both a betrayal and a desperate escape. I never thought I would be here. I never thought I would be the person who cheated, who crossed that line. But now I was. And despite the whirlwind of guilt and confusion swirling inside me, a part of me couldn't help but feel alive again. I had made my choice, and there was no turning back. I couldn't stop thinking about that night. It had been a few days, but the sensation of his lips on mine, the way he made me feel seen and wanted, kept replaying in my mind. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him. My partner had no idea, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to confront that reality. Every time I looked at them, I was reminded of how far we had drifted apart, how much we had changed. They weren't the same person I had fallen in love with, and I wasn't the same either. The distance had been there for so long that it had become a part of us. I didn't know how to fix it, but I knew that this connection with him felt real, felt like something I had been missing for so long. I tried to convince myself that it was just a fleeting moment, just a temporary escape from the emptiness I felt at home. But with each passing day, the guilt began to fade and was replaced by something else. Desire. Excitement. The longing to feel more of what I had experienced that night. And so I found myself meeting him again. And again. Each time, it felt like I was crossing further and further into territory I couldn't come back from. I couldn't explain it, but every time we were together, something in me shifted. It wasn't just the physical attraction, though that was undeniable. It was something deeper, something emotional. He listened to me in ways my partner hadn't in months. He made me feel like I mattered, like I wasn't just someone going through the motions. When we were together, I felt alive again. The emptiness that had consumed me for so long was temporarily filled. But it wasn't just about the affection. It was the way he looked at me, like I was everything to him, like I was the only thing that mattered in that moment. Our encounters became more frequent, more intimate. At first, it was innocent, just drinks, dinner, casual conversations, but soon it escalated. The line between platonic and romantic blurred so quickly, I didn't even notice. He would touch my arm during a conversation, lean in a little too close, and I felt that spark every time. I had convinced myself that it was just physical chemistry, that it was normal to feel drawn to someone outside my relationship. But deep down, I knew this was more than that. It wasn't just about sex or affection. It was about something I hadn't felt in years. One night, after a few glasses of wine, the atmosphere between us shifted again. The playful banter turned into something heavier, something that felt inevitable. I tried to resist, but the urge to be close to him was overwhelming. And when his hand found mine, I couldn't pull away. The energy between. The night had started off like any other. I had convinced myself that I could keep this under control, that it wasn't going to spiral out of hand. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. I had started to look forward to our time together, and that was dangerous. It was a high I couldn't come down from, a temptation I didn't want to resist. And tonight, he was coming over again. I told myself it would be fine, that we could just talk, that we could just keep it casual. But the way we looked at each other, the tension that always hung in the air, said otherwise. I knew where this was headed, and I didn't want to stop it. It was supposed to be simple, just a quick meeting after work. He had called me earlier in the day, and something in his voice made my heart race. There was a sense of urgency in his tone, something that told me tonight would be different. I tried to ignore it, to pretend like everything was normal, but as I made my way to the door to greet him, I could feel the weight of what I was about to do. I hadn't realized how much I was already slipping until I heard a knock at the door. For a moment, I froze, anxiety creeping in. What if my partner came home early? What if they caught us? But no, it was just him. I opened the door, and before I could say anything, he stepped inside. The familiar rush of excitement flooded my chest. He was here. As we stood there in the hallway, he reached for my hand, a silent understanding passing between us. It wasn't even about words anymore. We had crossed a line that I knew couldn't be undone. He smiled, the same smile that made me forget everything else. And for a second, I wanted to lose myself in it. But then I heard it, the sound of footsteps, light but unmistakable, coming from the other room. My heart stopped. It was my little brother. He had come over to grab something from my place, something I didn't expect him to need. The timing couldn't have been worse. I looked back at him, wide-eyed, hoping for a miracle, hoping that somehow he wouldn't notice anything strange. But it was too late. The door to the living room was ajar, and there was no way to hide what was happening. The silence stretched between us. I saw the shock in his eyes as he took in the scene. He didn't say anything, but the look on his face said everything. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My mind raced, and my heart pounded in my chest. What was I supposed to do? This wasn't part of the plan. For a moment, I thought about stopping everything, apologizing, telling him to leave, pretending this had all been a mistake. But I didn't. I couldn't. The desire was too strong, the need for this connection too powerful. I watched as my brother hesitated, his gaze flicking between us, uncertainty written all over his face. I saw the confusion, the hurt, and a part of me felt ashamed. But another part of me, the part that had been suffocating for so long, felt something else, relief. In that instant, I realized I wasn't ready to end this, not yet. Without saying a word, I turned back to him. I could feel his presence beside me, his warmth, his need, pulling me closer. There was no turning back now. It wasn't just about the physical attraction anymore, it was about something deeper, something that had been missing in my life for far too long. I was getting tangled in this web, and the more I tried to fight it, the more I was pulled in. I don't know how long we stood there, frozen, as my little brother watched. I didn't know what he was thinking, what he was feeling. But the longer I stood in that silence, the more the tension grew. There was no going back. The moment we were in was irreversible. And even though part of me screamed for us to stop, to fix everything before it got worse, I couldn't move. I couldn't let go. The sound of my brother's footsteps, his quiet retreat back into the hallway, broke the spell. He left, his face still frozen in disbelief, and the air seemed to settle in the room. But the weight of what had just happened didn't leave. It hung in the air between us, thick with regret and desire. I didn't know how to face what had just unfolded. I didn't know how to fix this. I glanced at him, my lover, and there was a brief, awkward silence between us. I couldn't look at him the same way anymore, not after what had just happened. But he didn't seem to feel the same hesitation. He stepped closer, his hand reaching for mine again, as if nothing had changed. The guilt gnawed at me, but the pull of him was stronger. And I couldn't stop it. I didn't know what I was doing anymore, didn't know how to untangle myself from this. But in that moment, all I could think about was him. My brother's reaction, the shame, the consequences, it all seemed so distant, so irrelevant. All that mattered was what I was feeling right now, what we were sharing. And I couldn't bring myself to stop. I couldn't sleep that night. The events from earlier kept replaying in my mind, each moment sharper than the last. My brother's face, the shock in his eyes, everything felt like a blur, but at the same time, it was so vivid. I couldn't escape the feeling of betrayal, not just toward my partner, but toward my family. The guilt gnawed at me. And yet, there was another part of me that felt almost numb, disconnected from the reality of what had just happened. I had let it continue. I had allowed it to spiral out of control, and now I had to face the consequences. The following morning, I acted like everything was normal. I kissed my partner goodbye, gave them a smile, and carried on with my day. But inside, I was suffocating. The life felt like a weight on my chest, pressing down on me with every passing moment. I knew that the silence between us couldn't last forever. My brother knew. He had seen everything, and I couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. Later that afternoon, I received a text from him. It was short, almost curt. "We need to talk." That was it. No explanation. No, "Are you okay?" Or, "What the hell was that?" Just those 3 words. I stared at the screen for a while, the dread building in the pit of my stomach. How was I going to explain this? How could I justify what I had done? When we met later, there were no pleasantries. He didn't even try to mask the anger in his eyes. "What the hell was that?" he asked, his voice low but full of hurt. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I felt like I was standing there, exposed, without any defense. He didn't need to ask for details. I could see the disgust in his face. He knew what had happened. "I don't know what you want me to say," I murmured. The words felt empty, even to me. What could I say? I couldn't explain my actions. I didn't even understand them myself. "I've been lost. I didn't know where to turn," I whispered, the guilt bubbling to the surface. He looked at me, incredulous, as if he couldn't fathom how I could betray everything for something so temporary, so fleeting. "You're married," he said, his voice thick with disbelief. "You're supposed to be loyal to them." And now he trailed off, shaking his head, unable to finish the sentence. His words hit me harder than I anticipated. It was the truth, and I couldn't hide from it. I had betrayed my partner, and now I had betrayed my brother's trust. The weight of it all felt unbearable. But what hurt the most was knowing that my brother, someone I loved and trusted, now saw me as something I didn't.